My parents said, "We can't afford your tuition this semester, try again next year." I nodded and took up 2 jobs to help out. But at my shift at the diner, I saw my brother celebrating his admission to an Ivy League with my parents. They toasted with champagne. I froze when I heard my dad laugh. "At least one of our kids is worth the investment." "Nora, it's not that we don't want to help," my mom said gently over the kitchen table, her hands folded tight, like she was praying. "We just can't afford your tuition this semester," my dad added, without looking up from his coffee. "Try again next year, all right?" I nodded. I didn't say a word. Later that week, I took 2 jobs to help out. I didn't complain. I figured we were all in this together. But then, one night at the diner, during a brutal double shift, I saw them, my parents and my brother, Julian, sitting in a booth, laughing and drinking champagne. Celebrating his admission to Columbia. My father said, with a toast and a smirk, "At least one of our kids is worth the investment." And in that moment, something in me quietly, permanently broke. Back then, I lived in Roanoke, Virginia. A slow, in-between kind of place where the mountains hugged the town like a reminder to stay small. I grew up believing my job was to be dependable. I was the responsible one. The quiet one. The one who followed the rules so closely that I forgot they could even be broken. I was 19 when this happened. Still wide-eyed enough to believe hard work was all it took. I had been accepted to the University of Virginia, my dream school, after years of studying late, giving up weekends, and balancing part-time jobs in high school. I wasn't the kind of girl who begged for things. I brought spreadsheets to the dinner table, circled financial aid options in red, and outlined how little help I needed. I had a partial scholarship, had qualified for work study, and needed just a few $1,000s to cover the remaining tuition for my first semester. I thought my parents would be proud. They weren't. That night, they sat me down with somber expressions like they were preparing to tell me about a death in the family. "Nora," my mother began, smoothing down her sweater. "We've looked at everything. Your dad and I just can't make the numbers work right now. We'll revisit it next year," my father added. "For now, maybe focus on working and saving. There's no shame in taking a gap year." I nodded. What else was I supposed to do? Argue? Beg? That wasn't me. So I applied at a local bakery downtown and picked up evening shifts at a 24-hour diner off the interstate. Most nights I'd smell like sugar and fry grease at the same time. My hands were constantly cracked from the cold dishwater, and my legs ached from standing, but I told myself it was all temporary. I told myself I was helping my family, and this was just what grown-ups did. And I believed it, right up until the night I saw the truth. It was a Friday. Hot. The kind of thick summer night that makes you sweat the moment you step outside. I was working the late shift at the diner. It was around 8:45 p.m., just after the dinner rush when the door jingled. I barely noticed at first. I was wiping down the counter, too tired to lift my head. Then I heard a voice I recognized, my mom's. There they were. My parents. And Julian. My little brother had just graduated high school and was every bit the golden boy, full ride AP classes, fluent in just enough French to impress strangers, the kind of charm you don't teach. We all knew he was going places. I didn't begrudge him that. But when I saw them all sit down in the corner booth, dressed up like they'd come from church or some nice dinner, I froze. They were smiling. Laughing. Julian was talking with his hands, animated, excited. My dad called the waitress over and ordered champagne, actual champagne. At our diner. That's when I knew. I didn't need to hear more. But I did. I was walking by to drop off dishes when I heard my father say it. "At least one of our kids is worth the investment." He laughed. My mom raised her glass. Julian smiled. And I stopped breathing. The plate slipped out of my hand and shattered on the floor. The noise silenced the corner of the diner for a moment. I stared at the pieces, then walked straight out the back door into the alley and didn't go back in. I didn't go home that night either. I drove around for a while. Then I parked near a gas station and slept in my car. My body ached from work. My chest ached from something deeper. I kept thinking, was I ever going to be enough for them? Over the next few days, I lived out of my car. I showered at a 24-hour gym and picked up extra shifts. I didn't answer calls. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I wasn't angry. That would have required more energy than I had. I was just done. I went home on the fourth day to grab some clothes. My mom was in the kitchen writing something in a notebook, probably a list for Julian's big college send-off. She looked up, surprised. "Oh, you're home," she said. I didn't answer. "Where have you been?" "I've been worried." I walked to my room. She followed. "Nora, don't be like this. We didn't do anything wrong. You're taking this too personally." "You celebrated with champagne," I said without turning around. "It was a special night. Julian got into Columbia. You said we couldn't afford my tuition." She sighed, the kind of sigh that parents use when they're done explaining. "You're different, Nora. You always figure things out. You'll land on your feet." I didn't need a compliment, I said. I needed help. My dad came into the hallway just then. "What's going on?" "She's upset about Julian." "No," I said. "I'm upset about you." They both stared at me like I was the one acting out of character. Like I was the child throwing a tantrum. "You could have told me the truth," I said. "That you had the money and just didn't want to spend it on me." "That's not what happened," my dad began. But I didn't wait to hear the rest. I grabbed my bag and walked out. I didn't look back. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment above a thrift store near downtown Roanoke. It was cramped, smelled like dust and old wood, and the windows whistled when it rained. But it was mine. I kept working both jobs and enrolled in online classes at the community college. The tuition was lower, and I was determined not to stop my education altogether. I took classes during the day, worked nights, and weekends. I didn't have time to think about much else. No dating, no social life. Just work, study, sleep, repeat. My friends from high school drifted away one by one, some moved to big cities, others stayed local but lost touch. I didn't chase anyone. Every once in a while, I'd hear about Julian through extended family. He was thriving, they said. Doing so well in New York. My mom posted photos on Facebook of his dorm room, orientation week, and visits to Central Park. In one picture, they were standing outside of a Broadway theater, smiling like tourists, dressed in clothes that definitely weren't bought on sale. It made my stomach turn. They hadn't visited me once. Not when I moved out. Not when I started college. Not even when I landed a job at a local tax office after finishing my associate degree. I learned to stop expecting them to show up. But I kept showing up for myself. It took me 6 years to finish school while working full-time. I transferred credits from the community college to James Madison University's online program and chipped away at my bachelor's in accounting. When I finally graduated, I didn't throw a party. I didn't post about it. I sat on the floor of my apartment with a grocery store cupcake and a bottle of sparkling cider, alone, and whispered, "You did it." Then I cried. About a year later, I got a job offer in Richmond. Better pay, better hours, health benefits. I packed up and moved again, this time to a newer apartment with a washer and dryer inside the unit. A luxury I didn't think I'd ever afford. My life settled into something steady. Quiet, but mine. I bought myself a second-hand couch, a real desk, even a little espresso machine after my third promotion. I started walking after work. Got a cat named Rue. Signed up for pottery classes just because I could. I hadn't spoken to my parents in nearly 4 years. Julian, maybe twice. Once when he sent a birthday text and again when he emailed me a YouTube video he thought I'd like. That was the extent of our relationship. Then, one fall afternoon, I got a call from my aunt, Lila's mother. She said Lila, my cousin, was getting married in Norfolk and that everyone would be there. She hoped I'd come. She missed me. I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to see Lila, but because I knew who everyone included. I said I'd think about it. The night before the wedding, I didn't sleep. I kept imagining what I'd say to my parents if I saw them. Whether Julian would talk to me. Whether I'd still feel like a ghost standing in the same room as them. But I went. I drove the 2.5 hours to Norfolk with a simple navy dress and my old car humming the whole way. When I arrived, I nearly turned around. But Lila saw me, ran out, and hugged me so tight I thought she might crack a rib. I stayed. They were there. Of course, they were. My mom's hair was more gray than I remembered. My father walked slower, his back slightly hunched. Julian stood beside them, tall and quiet, looking smaller, somehow tired. He was wearing a suit that didn't quite fit and shoes that looked too new, like they were borrowed for the occasion. They saw me. All three of them. And for a moment, no one said a word. It was Julian who broke the silence. "Hey, Nora." His voice was softer than I remembered. Less cocky. I nodded. "Hey. You look good." "Thanks." Then nothing. Not even a hug. I walked past them and found my seat. Later, during the reception, Julian found me again. This time, with a glass of punch in his hand and a folded jacket slung over his arm. He stood beside me quietly before speaking. "I dropped out," he said. I looked at him. "What?" "Columbia. I dropped out a year after I got there." "You never told me." Didn't want to disappoint them. They made such a big deal about it. Felt like I owed them something. I didn't know what to say. "I moved back home for a while," he added. "Then I started working at a bookstore. It's not much, but I like it." I stared ahead. "You were always their favorite." "I know." He said it like it hurt. "I used to think I had to live up to what they wanted me to be," he continued. "Then I realized I didn't even know who I was." I nodded slowly. Took me a while to figure that out too. We stood there for a long time, not talking. Just two adults with too much shared history and too few honest conversations. Eventually, he said, "I'm sorry." For that night at the diner. I didn't know what they said until later. I didn't say, "It's okay," because it wasn't. But I said, "Thanks." And maybe that was enough for then. Julian didn't linger after that. We didn't fall into a big heart-to-heart or some magical moment where years of silence were erased by one apology. That's not how real life works, at least not mine. But something shifted. Not a full mending, maybe just a soft crack where air could finally pass through. I watched him rejoin our parents at the reception. They looked older than I remembered, more fragile, even, but still wrapped in that quiet smugness they always carried when they were around people they wanted to impress. They were talking to one of Lila's new in-laws, probably bragging about something Julian did years ago, unaware or unwilling to admit that the story no longer held weight. I stayed near the edges. I danced with a few cousins, smiled through conversations, and mostly kept my distance from the people who once made me feel invisible under the same roof we shared. Near the end of the night, my mother found me by the dessert table, where I was quietly nursing a plate of cookies. "You look well," she said, her voice just loud enough to carry over the music. "Thanks." There was a pause. She looked like she had more to say. Something that had been practiced. "You know, we did what we thought was best," she said. "Back then." I stayed quiet. "You were always independent. We thought you'd make it, no matter what." I turned and met her eyes. "And that justified letting me struggle alone?" Her expression faltered, but only slightly. "We didn't think it was struggling." "You didn't say anything." I laughed under my breath. "Of course not." You never asked. We stood there in silence, the distance between us heavier than any years that had passed. Then she said something that surprised me. I think about it sometimes. That night at the diner. Your face when we walked in. I think I knew. I just didn't want to admit what we were doing. Which was? I asked. She didn't answer right away. She looked down at her hands, then back at me. Betting on the kid we thought would take us somewhere. And letting the one who could have carried herself, carry everything. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She looked over at Julian, who was now talking to someone near the open bar, smiling politely but not laughing. He's different now, she added. Quieter. Not like before. I think he's still figuring things out. Aren't we all? I said. She gave me a small, strange smile. Not warm exactly, maybe wistful. Like she was looking at someone she used to know and suddenly realizing they'd grown up without her noticing. I hope you're happy, Nora. I am, I said. And it was the truth. Not the kind of bright, shiny happiness that gets posted on social media, but the kind that grows slowly, rooted in earned independence and the quiet victories no one sees. After the wedding, I drove back to Richmond in silence. No music, just the hum of tires on asphalt and the low buzz of my thoughts. I thought about how strange it was to share blood with people who could feel so foreign. How you can live a whole life in the shadows of someone else's expectations and still come out standing. I thought about that moment in the diner, me in my apron, sweating through a 10-hour shift, watching them drink champagne under the warm glow of ceiling bulbs that buzzed like insects. And then I thought about it. Me, alone in a car I paid off myself, heading back to a life I built brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck. I had made it, not with their help but in spite of their silence. And somehow, that made the victory taste even sharper. The weeks after the wedding passed quietly. Life returned to its usual rhythm, early mornings, steady work, the occasional weekend walk at Bird Park or coffee with a coworker. Nothing dramatic, just the slow build of something real. Something that didn't ask for applause. I didn't reach out to Julian after the wedding. He didn't reach out to me either. But a month later, I got a small, brown envelope in the mail. No return address, but the handwriting on the front was familiar. It was his. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a printout of a photo I'd never seen before. It was old, faded at the corners. We were kids. Probably 8 and 11. Julian and I are sitting on the front porch of our old house, popsicles in hand, both of us grinning with bright red mouths and tangled hair. I remembered that day. We'd been sent outside after a fight, something stupid about the TV remote, and eventually, we'd cooled off, sitting side by side in silence, sweating through the heat together. On the back of the photo, in messy ballpoint pen, he'd written, "For what it's worth, I always looked up to you." No signature. No follow-up. Just that. I didn't cry when I read it. I didn't call him. I just placed it on my fridge under a magnet shaped like a peach, and let it sit there like an apology that didn't need to be rehashed. Weeks turned into months. The cold came early that year. I bought my first proper winter coat, a black wool one that felt too nice for someone who used to shop clearance racks with shaking hands. I started hosting little dinners in my apartment, nothing big, just coworkers or neighbors. I didn't tell anyone about the dinner story. That part of my life still felt like it belonged to another version of me. A girl with sore feet and a tired smile, always putting herself second. Around the holidays, I got a call from my dad. It was the first in years. He didn't start with a greeting, just went straight into it. "Your mother wanted me to call. We're having a small dinner on Christmas Eve. Nothing big. Just us. Thought you might come." I almost said no without thinking. The old reflex, that part of me is still a little raw. But I paused. "Julian will be there," he added. "What about me?" I asked. "Will I just be the girl who dropped in for a plate and left before dessert?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something I didn't expect. "We made a lot of mistakes with you, Nora. I don't think either of us knew how much. But I'd like to see you. Even if it's awkward. Even if you're just there for an hour." I didn't give an answer that day. I told him I'd think about it. And I did. Part of me wanted to believe that people could change. That the same parents who once wrote me off with a shrug and a tuition check denied could, somehow, learn to see me again, not the daughter they expected, but the woman I had become. But the other part remembered the silence. The champagne. The laughter. In early December, I ran into Julian again, by accident this time. I was at a bookstore in Richmond, the small independent one I liked to visit on Sundays when the world moved a little slower. I was in the nonfiction section when I heard my name. "Nora?" I turned, and there he was, holding a stack of books and wearing the kind of expression you'd give someone you're not sure still wants to know you. He laughed awkwardly. "Didn't expect to see you here." "You work here?" "Yeah. Couple days a week. The rest of the time I'm doing freelance copywriting. Trying to figure out what I'm actually good at." We stood there between shelves, the air dusty with old pages and unspoken things. He looked healthier than he did at the wedding. Softer around the edges. Like life had peeled away the layers of arrogance and left something real behind. "I got your photo," I said. He smiled. "Took me forever to find it. Mom had it in an old photo album buried under boxes." I nodded. "Thanks." We walked to the cafe in the back of the bookstore. It was quiet. Dim lights, old wooden floors, the hum of a milk steamer in the background. We sat down with 2 mugs of coffee and didn't rush. He told me he'd been in therapy. That dropping out of Columbia had felt like being exiled from the family mythology. "They pinned everything on me," he said, staring into his mug. "I think part of me resented you not because you failed them, but because you didn't try to win them the way I did. And still, you came out stronger." I said nothing. Just listened. "They saw me as an investment," he continued. "But you were the one building something the whole time. I just didn't see it until everything fell apart." I didn't know how to respond. There was a time when I would have killed for those words. Now they felt like a strange, late arrival, welcome, but not necessary. He glanced at me. "Are you gonna go to Christmas?" "I don't know. They're trying, in their own weird way. They've had to reckon with a lot." "So did I said, not unkindly. He nodded, slowly. "I won't push. Just, if you come, it'd mean something. Even if we just eat in silence and watch bad TV after." We sat there for another hour, talking about nothing important. Books, coffee, a podcast he liked. It was easy. Lighter than I expected. Like maybe, finally, we were 2 adults who could meet somewhere in the middle. When I left the bookstore that day, I wasn't sure what I'd do about the invitation. But I realized something else. I didn't need a picture-perfect reconciliation. I didn't need a parade of apologies or long speeches about regrets. I didn't even need to be fully understood. I just needed to be able to walk into a room with my head held high, knowing I got there on my own. I thought about that Christmas invitation for the next 2 weeks. Not constantly. Just, whenever I walked past the fridge and saw that photo. Or when I sat by myself in the evenings, mug in hand, watching the quiet snow start to fall outside my apartment window. That kind of silence has a way of stirring things up. It wasn't about wanting them to grovel. I didn't expect my parents to rewrite history or fall to their knees in regret. I knew they wouldn't. They were the type of people who thought intention mattered more than impact. They hadn't meant to hurt me, so in their minds, they never truly had. But I wanted something. Not revenge in the sharp, cinematic sense. No shouting or slamming doors. Just a moment. A turning of the tables. So, I said yes. I drove back to Roanoke on Christmas Eve, arriving just as the sun dipped behind the Blue Ridge. The neighborhood hadn't changed much, same sagging porches, same dog 3 doors down that barked at anything with wheels. Their house was warm, the smell of turkey in the air. My mom answered the door, startled but smiling, and Julian was already in the living room, setting the table. My dad greeted me like we hadn't spent the past several years in near total silence, like time had conveniently smoothed over everything. We ate. We made small talk. Julian, ever the mediator now, steered conversation to neutral topics, books, weather, the new grocery store downtown. After dinner, while my mom brought out dessert, my dad turned to me. "So, how's work? Still doing accounting?" "I actually opened my own firm," I said, calmly. His eyebrows rose. "You did?" "2 years ago. Just me and a few employees. We do small business consulting now. Mostly local clients, but we're expanding." That silenced the table. Julian looked at me, grinning just slightly. "You never said." I sipped my cider. Didn't think anyone was interested. My dad cleared his throat. "Well, that's impressive. Running your own firm." My mom appeared, holding a pie dish, clearly trying to bridge the shift in energy. "That's wonderful, Nora. We're so proud of you." "Thanks," I said. Then added, almost offhandedly, "We just picked up a new client, too. Funny thing, it's the bookstore chain that just bought out all the local independents. I'll be auditing their finances." Julian blinked. "Wait, the one I work at?" I nodded. "Yeah. The acquisition includes your store. Looks like a full conversion is scheduled next year." He sat back, a little stunned. "You're auditing the place I work at?" I smiled, politely. "It's a small world." My mom chuckled awkwardly. "Well, look at you. That's quite a full circle moment, isn't it?" I met her eyes. "Yeah. I guess I am worth the investment after all." The silence was soft but absolute. My father didn't say a word. My mom lowered her fork. Julian, to his credit, gave a small laugh, more out of surprise than mockery. I didn't push it. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I had built something real. Without their help. Without their belief. And now, sitting in the same kitchen where they once told me to try again next year, I had outpaced their expectations, their projections, their investments. It was the kind of revenge that didn't hurt anyone, but lingered. I stayed for another hour, drank coffee, and helped clean up. Then I stood to leave, gathered my coat, and thanked them for dinner. My mom hugged me at the door. My dad mumbled something that might have been "take care." Julian walked me out to the car. Before I got in, he turned to me. "I meant what I said. I've always looked up to you." I nodded. "I know." He grinned, small and sheepish. "Try not to shut down my store too fast, okay? No promises." He laughed. I waved, and then I left. Driving back to Richmond that night, I didn't feel triumphant or bitter. I felt calm. Satisfied. It wasn't that I'd gotten back at them. It was that I'd made a life so full, so whole, so mine, there was no version of the past that could reduce me anymore. They had gambled on the shiny one, the star. The boy they thought would carry the family name up and out. And the quiet girl who once washed dishes and cried behind dumpsters? She built her own empire. And she didn't owe anyone a damn thing.